The most powerful man in the world wrote private notes about his deep sadness. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, held absolute authority over millions, yet his personal writings reveal a constant, private struggle with a heavy melancholy. This is the central paradox we are going to explore. You will learn the exact mental framework he used to not only endure this inner turmoil, but to lead an empire through relentless crises because of it. This is not a simple biography. It is an investigation into the raw, practical application of ancient philosophy under the most extreme pressure imaginable. How can someone burdened by dark thoughts also shoulder the weight of an entire civilization? The answer was written in a private journal he never intended. The book we now call Meditations. Within its pages lies a powerful system for turning personal pain into resilient, effective action. By the end, you will understand how his deepest struggle became the source of his enduring strength, and how those same tools are available for anyone facing their own battles today. We begin with a ruler at the peak of his power, secretly wrestling with a profound question. How do you perform your duty when everything inside you wants to retreat? He was handed the world at its most fragile moment. Marcus Aurelius did not ascend to a golden throne of leisure and contemplation. The year was 161, and the purple robe of the emperor was less a symbol of glory than a cloak of unimaginable responsibility. The Roman Empire stretched from the misty highlands of Britain to the deserts of Syria, a colossal achievement, but its vastness was its greatest vulnerability. Every border was a potential flashpoint, every province a logistical nightmare to govern. This was not an inheritance of peace. It was a receipt for a series of escalating emergencies that would demand every ounce of his being. Almost immediately, the Parthian Empire in the east launched an invasion, shattering decades of uneasy stability. He sent his adopted brother, Lucius Verus, to command the legions there, but the conflict would drag on for years, draining the treasury and the manpower of Rome. Then, as if war was not enough, the soldiers returning from that eastern campaign brought back with them a silent, far more deadly enemy. Historians call it the Antonine Plague, a devastating illness that swept through the empire, claiming countless lives and crippling the economy. The streets of Rome itself, the very heart of his power, were filled with loss and fear. And in the midst of this, the northern frontiers along the Danube River began to tremble. Germanic tribes, seeing a distracted and weakened Rome, started to push across the border, threatening to tear the empire apart from another direction entirely. So picture the sheer scale of the burden. Here is a man, by nature inclined toward philosophy and quiet study, who must now make daily decisions that will determine the fate of millions. He must fund two distant wars simultaneously, while a plague ravages the tax base and the labor force. He must console a grieving populace while projecting unshakable strength to Rome's enemies. And then a profound personal blow struck amidst the public chaos. His co-emperor, Lucius Verus, died suddenly, likely a victim of the very plague their wars had unleashed. In an instant, the shared weight of the empire fell onto Marcus's shoulders alone. His reign, from the very first day, was a masterclass in relentless crisis management. There would be no peaceful years to settle in, no quiet seasons for detached philosophical rule. Every dawn brought a new report of a battlefield loss, a provincial revolt, or a city succumbing to illness. This is the crucible in which his philosophy was forged, not in a quiet library, but in the chaotic, smoke-filled command tents on the edge of civilization. The private sadness he carried now had to coexist with very public, very immediate catastrophe. How does a mind prone to melancholy not simply collapse under such a load? The answer begins with a fundamental shift in perspective, a mental tool he used to transform overwhelming pressure into clear, deliberate action. This raw, unfiltered voice is preserved in a small book he never meant for us to read. We know it today as Meditations, but that title is a modern invention. He called it simply Ta Eis Hüten, which translates to himself. These were not polished essays for an audience, but private notes, a spiritual exercise written in the quiet hours of the night, likely by candlelight in his military tent on the frontier. They are memoranda to his own soul, a relentless dialogue meant to coach himself through the next difficult day. And within these pages, the mask of the invincible emperor falls completely away. We hear a man confessing a deep, persistent weariness. He writes of the body as a burden, a sack of decay, and expresses a palpable disgust with its frailties and appetites. He speaks of the soul being dyed by the color of its thoughts, and warns himself constantly against being submerged by them. One of the most telling passages reads, "Do not waste the remainder of your life in thoughts about others, when you are not thinking with reference to some aspect of the common good. Why are you robbing yourself of the time for some other task?" This is the voice of a man arguing himself out of a spiral, a mind trying to talk itself back from the edge of despair and into purposeful action. He wrestles with dark impressions, calling them mere smoke and shadows. The contrast between this private portrait and his public image could not be more stark. Official histories and the Stoic, bearded statues carved in marble show Marcus Aurelius the unwavering leader, the philosopher-king radiating calm authority. The coins minted with his profile broadcast stability and divine favor to every corner of the empire, but the journal reveals the immense cost of maintaining that facade. It shows us that his composure was not a natural state, but a hard-won achievement, a daily practice of pulling his mind away from melancholy and anchoring it to duty. This duality is the very heart of his story. The depression was not a weakness he eliminated, but a constant companion he learned to manage through a disciplined set of mental protocols. He built a firewall between his inner turmoil and his outer responsibilities, and the blueprint for that construction is detailed in every page of his private writings. The philosophy he turned to was not an escape from reality, but a manual for navigating it. Think of Stoicism not as a set of dusty old ideas, but as a kind of psychological operating system, a suite of mental programs designed to run under extreme conditions. Its goal was not to feel nothing, which is a common misunderstanding, but to feel clearly and act wisely regardless of the storm of impressions inside. For Marcus, it was a survival toolkit, and he deployed 3 core applications from it daily. The first and most critical was the dichotomy of control. This is the simple, brutal act of sorting every single thing that happens into 2 mental folders. Folder 1 contains only what is within your own power, your judgments, your intentions, your actions, and your reactions. Folder 2 contains everything else: the weather, the past, other people's opinions, the outcome of a battle, even the health of your own body. His practice was to immediately stop wasting mental energy on Folder 2 and to pour all of his focus and effort into Folder 1. When the plague spread, he could not cure it, that was in Folder 2, but he could organize relief, fund doctors, and maintain public order. Those actions were firmly in Folder 1. This mental sorting was his primary defense against feeling overwhelmed. The second program was what later philosophers called Amor Fati, a love of one's fate. This does not mean enjoying tragedy or pretending hardship is pleasant. It means accepting the events that befall you as the necessary raw material for your life. For Marcus, it was the radical decision to stop resisting the reality of his situation. The wars, the plague, his own melancholy, these were not mistakes or punishments. They were simply the plot of his life. His task was not to wish for a different story, but to play his role in this one with courage and integrity. He writes, "Do not seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Rather, wish that what happens happen the way it happens, and you will be happy." This mindset transformed obstacles into the very path forward. Finally, when the weight of the present felt crushing, he would run the view from above. This is a mental exercise where you pull your perspective back, far back. You see your city not as streets filled with anxiety, but as a tiny cluster of buildings on the earth. You see the earth itself as a mere speck in the cosmos, and your lifetime as a brief flicker in the expanse of time. From this vantage point, your immediate crisis, while real and important, loses its power to completely distort your vision. The barbarian invasion, the political intrigue, even the empire itself, were temporary conditions in an eternal flow. This was not meant to make his work seem pointless, but to relieve the panic, to create the emotional space needed to do that work with a steady hand. Together, these tools created a resilient inner citadel. They allowed Marcus to separate his internal state from external chaos, to engage with duty without being consumed by despair. But how exactly did he translate these philosophical concepts from nightly journal entries into concrete decisions at the break of dawn? The war on the northern frontier demanded his physical presence, a decision that would define his final years. Marcus Aurelius left Rome not for a palace by the sea, but for the damp, cold outposts along the Danube River. Here, the theoretical tools of his philosophy faced their ultimate field test. The dichotomy of control was no longer a comforting thought exercise. It became his daily survival protocol. Every morning in that military camp, he was confronted with a flood of events utterly outside his command. He could not control the freezing rain that turned roads to mud, slowing his supply lines. He could not control the rumors of a larger tribal force gathering beyond the next forest. He could not control the morale of a legion decimated by illness. To dwell on these external facts was a direct path to paralysis, so his mind performed that critical sort over and over. His focus narrowed exclusively to what resided in his own sphere. He could not make the rain stop, but he could ensure his engineers had the materials to repair bridges. He could not know the enemy's exact numbers, but he could control the discipline of his scouts and the readiness of his defenses. He could not prevent soldiers from falling ill, but he could control the efficiency of the field hospitals and the fairness of the rations. This mental discipline created a zone of clear, actionable responsibility amidst the chaos. It transformed an overwhelming crisis into a series of manageable tasks. We see this in his response to the Great Plague as well. The spread of the illness itself, the fear it generated, the personal grief of so many losses, these were enfolded to the realm of things not up to him. What was up to him? He reorganized the state finances to fund doctors and care for orphans. He used his authority to maintain civic order, preventing panic from causing more harm than the disease. In his meetings, he controlled his own composure, projecting a calm that steadied those around him, because he knew a leader's visible despair was a luxury the empire could not afford. This practice did not make him cold or detached. On the contrary, it channeled his compassion into effective action rather than dissipating it into helpless anxiety. By refusing to be emotionally hijacked by what he could not change, he preserved all his energy for what he could. The barbarians at the gate were not a personal affront or a sign of cosmic failure. They were simply a condition of the terrain, a problem to be met with strategy, logistics, and resolve. This is how the dichotomy of control built mental space. It was the difference between staring at a storm in terror and methodically battening down the hatches. But this focus on action required a specific kind of fuel, a mindset that could find purpose not in spite of hardship, but directly within it. The muddy banks of the Danube became his home for the better part of a decade. While the comforts of Rome faded into a distant memory, Marcus Aurelius faced the relentless grind of frontier life. The endless cycle of military planning, harsh winters, and sporadic, brutal conflict. It was here, in the grit and exhaustion, that his second philosophical tool moved from theory into bone-deep practice, a principle known as Amor Fati, the love of one's fate. This was not about enjoying hardship. It was the radical act of ceasing to fight the reality of his own life. He could have seen these years as a cruel exile, a punishment for being emperor. He could have resented the cold, the danger, the distance from his family and libraries. Instead, his journal from the camp reveals a conscious reframing. This was not a deviation from his path, it was the path itself. His duty was not a separate thing from his suffering. The suffering was the very substance of his duty. He writes to himself, "Do not be disgusted, do not give up, do not be angry. Your own worth is measured by the worth of the activities you devote yourself to." And so he devoted himself completely to the activity before him, the unglamorous, vital work of securing the frontier. He accepted the rain that soaked his cloak as part of the campaign. He accepted the fatigue in his bones as the cost of leadership. He accepted the barbarian tribes not as monsters, but as human beings acting according to their own nature, a force of nature he was tasked to meet. This acceptance was not passive surrender, it was the source of his active resolve. By loving his fate, by embracing the plot of his life exactly as it was written, he drained the situation of its bitterness and uncovered its purpose. The cold watch on the river was no longer a sentence to be endured. It was his post, his role in the vast, interconnected order of the cosmos. A tree does not resent bearing fruit. A sentinel does not resent the long night. They simply fulfill their function. Marcus saw himself in the same light. This mindset transformed resentment into a steady, unwavering focus. Every logistical problem, every diplomatic negotiation, every moment of personal discomfort became another piece of the material he was given to sculpt. The goal was not to have a different block of marble, but to carve this one with skill and virtue. His purpose was found not in spite of the Danube campaign, but within it, in the daily act of doing what needed to be done with integrity, patience, and a mind free from complaint. This is how he weathered years that would have broken a spirit clinging to a different, easier reality. Yet, even with this profound acceptance of his circumstances, the scale of his responsibility could still feel crushing, threatening to shrink his vision to the immediate crisis. For that, he employed a final perspective-shifting exercise, one that lifted his gaze from the mud of the camp to the stars themselves. Sometimes, in the deepest cold of a frontier night, he would close his eyes and travel. This was his third and most profound mental exercise, the view from above. It was a deliberate journey of the mind, a way to escape the crushing weight of the present by zooming out further and further, until his personal anguish and even the fate of Rome itself shrank into their proper proportion. He would begin by visualizing the very military camp around him, seeing not just his own tent but the rows of others, the soldiers huddled around fires, the horses standing silent in the mist. Then he would pull his perspective higher, as if lifting into the sky, until the camp was just a tiny geometric pattern on the vast, dark landscape of the Danube Valley. Higher still, until the entire province was a patchwork of forests and rivers. Then the whole of the empire became a mere shape on the edge of the great inland sea. He would see the Mediterranean as a small lake, and the earth itself as a blue and green marble hanging in an immense, silent blackness. From this impossible vantage point, everything changed. The urgent dispatch from a rebellious governor, the shortage of grain for the legions, the persistent ache of his own sadness, these were not eliminated, but they were contextualized. They became small events in a long, long story. He would contemplate the flow of time, imagining all the people who had lived in that very river valley before him, generations of families, warriors, farmers, their joys and their sorrows now completely forgotten. He would think of all those who would come after, for whom his own desperate war would be a faint line in a history book, if it was remembered at all. This was not an exercise in futility designed to make his efforts seem pointless. It was the opposite. It was a tool to drain the panic and the ego from his situation. The view from above answered a corrosive, unspoken question that haunts anyone under immense pressure. What if I fail? From the cosmic perspective, the answer was, you will, and then the world will continue. The empire might rise or fall, but the stars would remain. This realization was liberating, not terrifying. It meant his job was not to single-handedly bear the eternal weight of history, but to do his best with the brief moment he was given. His struggles were not a unique curse, but part of the universal human condition, a tiny thread in an endless tapestry. By shrinking his problems against the backdrop of infinity, he created the emotional space he needed to address them with calm clarity. The barbarian chieftain demanding terms was no longer a monstrous foe, but another man playing his part in the same vast drama. This mental zoom out allowed him to return to the zoomed-in reality of his command tent with renewed steadiness. The problems were still there, but they had lost their power to distort his mind. He could now see them as tasks to be managed, not as monsters to be feared. This philosophical perspective did not make him care less. It allowed him to act more effectively, free from the suffocating gravity of his own significance. It was the ultimate antidote to the feeling that everything depended on him alone. With this triad of tools controlling his focus, loving his fate, and transcending his perspective, Marcus built an unshakable inner fortress. But a fortress, no matter how strong, is ultimately a defensive structure. How did he move from enduring his reality to actively shaping it, to turning his private philosophy into public policy that would leave a lasting mark on the world he was trying to hold together? His private journal became a training ground for his own sight. Within the worn pages of his meditations, Marcus Aurelius engaged in a relentless exercise, what Stoics called the discipline of perception. This was not about seeing more, but about seeing clearly, about scrubbing away the emotional distortion that his melancholy naturally produced. Depression, then as now, has a way of tinting the lens through which we view the world. A single piece of bad news can feel like a final verdict. A minor obstacle can appear as an insurmountable wall. Marcus knew this tendency intimately within himself, and he fought it daily with a simple, brutal rule: do not describe events with the language of catastrophe. Strip the valued judgment away from the fact itself. A messenger arrives at his tent, breathless, reporting that a cavalry unit has been ambushed and driven back. The raw fact is, we have lost ground in the northern valley. The untrained mind, the mind in the grip of despair, immediately layers on interpretations. This is a disaster. Our strategy is failing. The men are losing faith. This proves the campaign is doomed. Marcus practiced stopping that narrative at the source. He would write to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." So he would force his perception to hold only to the bare event. A setback has occurred. The word setback is neutral. It contains no doom. It simply describes a change in position that requires a new action. By refusing to call it a catastrophe, he prevented the emotional cascade that would follow: the panic, the self-blame, the paralysis. This mental discipline created a vital pause, a space between the event and his reaction. In that space, clear-headed analysis could live. Now he could ask practical questions. What intelligence did we gain from this engagement? How do we adjust our supply lines? Which officers need reinforcement? The problem remained, but it was now a logistical and strategic puzzle to be solved, not a psychological abyss to fall into. He applied this same razor to personal hardship as well. Waking with a deep weariness, his body aching from the damp cold, he would not label it as unbearable suffering. He would note the sensation plainly: the body is tired and stiff. Then he would remind himself that his character, his capacity for action, was not determined by these physical feelings. The fatigue was in folder 2, not up to him. Getting up and attending to his duties was in folder 1, completely within his power. This reframing turned what felt like a heavy personal burden into a simple condition of the morning, like fog on the river, something to move through. This is how he managed the immense psychological pressure of the plague. The loss of life was a tragic fact, but his perception of it, his interpretation, was his to command. He could see it as a sign of divine abandonment, a reason to despair, or he could see it as a severe test of his leadership and his compassion. He chose the latter. By perceiving the plague not as a meaningless horror but as the central challenge of his reign, he could channel his energy into the folder 1 responses, organizing care, supporting orphans, maintaining civic stability. The discipline of perception was his primary tool for maintaining operational clarity in a world that constantly screamed for despair. It allowed him to separate the signal of what was actually happening from the overwhelming noise of what his fears whispered it meant. The raw facts of a situation demanded a response, but his personal feelings were no longer the compass. This is where Marcus Aurelius moved from disciplined perception into the second, more powerful Stoic practice, the discipline of action. For him, duty was not a burden to resent, it was the very antidote to his despair. On mornings when a heavy melancholy made the world seem colorless and effort pointless, he did not search for a sudden surge of personal motivation. He did not wait to feel inspired. Instead, he turned to a simple, external question: what does my role require of me? His role as emperor, as a human being in a community, provided a clear, unwavering script. Getting out of bed was not an act of self-improvement on those days, it was an act of service. The needs of the empire gave him a reason to move when his own spirit could not. This transformed his profound sense of responsibility from a weight into a lifeline. His actions were not driven by ambition for glory or fear of criticism, but were guided by a strict, self-imposed code of justice, kindness, and service to the common good. He writes, "What is not good for the swarm is not good for the bee." Every decision, from settling a legal dispute to planning a military campaign, was filtered through this principle. Was it just? Was it kind? Did it serve the health of the whole community? This moral framework gave a clear structure to his days, a series of purposeful tasks that left no room for the paralysis of introspection. When personal sadness whispered that nothing mattered, the concrete needs of a soldier waiting for pay, a city needing grain, a province seeking fair governance, shouted back that everything did. He channeled the immense energy of his inner turmoil outward into the meticulous work of administration. We see this in the historical record of his reign. He sold off imperial treasures, his own family's heirlooms, to fund the wars without raising taxes on the already burdened populace. He reformed laws to better protect orphans and widows, especially those left behind by the plague. He spent hours each day hearing legal cases, not as a distant ruler, but as a judge seeking equitable outcomes, because he saw justice as an active, daily practice. This relentless focus on duty created a powerful psychological feedback loop. Each completed task, each small act of service, was a tangible counter-argument to the voice of despair. It proved to him through action that he was capable and effective, even when he did not feel that way inside. The discipline of action built a bridge between his inner world of struggle and the outer world of need, and by walking that bridge every day, he found a stable path forward. His life became a testament to a profound idea that we are not healed by thinking our way out of darkness, but often by acting our way into the light. By committing to what he owed others, he quietly repaid a debt to himself, reconstructing a sense of worth from the materials of service. This outward focus, however, required an inner compass that never wavered, a core self that remained untouched by both the praise of crowds and the sting of loss. But all his disciplined action unfolded in a world of profound uncertainty. No emperor, no matter how virtuous, could control the final outcome of a battle, the loyalty of an ally, or the course of an illness. This is where Marcus Aurelius applied the third and most difficult discipline, the discipline of will, which meant accepting any result with a calm mind. For someone prone to melancholy, this was perhaps the most vital skill of all. Depression often creates a cruel trap. It ties our sense of worth and peace to specific outcomes, to feeling happy, to achieving ease, to receiving approval, outcomes that can feel perpetually out of reach. When those desired results fail to materialize, the fall into despair is swift and deep. Marcus systematically dismantled this trap. He trained his will to desire only one thing, the integrity of his own effort. Everything else, the victory or defeat, the praise or criticism, the rise or fall of his health, he learned to greet with equanimity, a steady, undisturbed calm. He writes, "Do not be anxious about the future. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present." His weapon was the understanding that the quality of his attempt was his alone, but the result belonged to the world, to fortune, to the complex web of causes beyond any single person's control. This mindset was his shield against the despair of failed expectations. Consider his long campaigns on the Danube. He could plan the perfect strategy, inspire his troops, and ensure every supply line was secure. Yet, a sudden flood could wash away a bridge, a trusted officer could make a fatal error, or an enemy tribe could unite in an unexpected way. The old Marcus, the one before this training, might have seen a lost battle as a personal moral failure, a sign that his efforts were worthless. The Marcus who practiced the discipline of will saw it differently. He would assess, did I act with courage and wisdom to the best of my ability? If the answer was yes, then the outcome, however disappointing, was not a reflection of his character. It was simply the next piece of reality to be accepted and addressed. This acceptance was not resignation. It was the ultimate form of resilience. It meant that no external event, no matter how catastrophic, could rob him of his core achievement, which was living with virtue in that moment. When the plague took a close friend or a family member, he grieved, but he did not rage against the universe for being unfair. He accepted the loss as part of the natural order, a return of a borrowed life to its source. This allowed his sorrow to remain clean, unpoisoned by the added bitterness of a belief that things should have been different. His equanimity in the face of what he could not change created an unshakable inner stability. Political betrayal, military setbacks, the frailties of his own aging body, these were all winds that blew against him. But because his will was anchored not in controlling the wind, but in adjusting his own sails with integrity, he could not be capsized. His sense of peace was no longer hostage to the ever-changing world outside. It was built on the one thing that never had to change, his commitment to doing the right thing right now and letting the story take care of itself. This final discipline completed the inner fortress, allowing him to engage fully with the world while remaining fundamentally free from its turmoil. It raises a compelling question for us today. How does a philosophy forged in imperial tents and ancient plagues translate to the quiet, personal battles of modern life? His days were not left to the whim of his mood. While the empire swirled with unpredictable crisis, Marcus Aurelius built a fortress of personal routine, a strict, almost monastic schedule that governed his life from dawn until dusk. This was not about luxury or indulgence, it was about psychological survival. For a mind that could easily spiral into dark inertia, the external structure of a non-negotiable routine acted as a set of rails, ensuring the essential functions of leadership and self-care continued forward, even on days when his internal engine had no power of its own. His mornings began early with a deliberate practice of setting his intentions before the world could impose its own. He would rise and quietly remind himself of the nature of the day ahead, not as a series of burdens, but as a field for the exercise of specific virtues. He might tell himself, today you will meet with arrogance, so you will practice patience. You will face complexity, so you will practice clarity. You will feel tired, so you will practice endurance. This was not positive thinking in the modern sense. It was tactical preparation, a mental dressing of the armor he would need. Following this, he dedicated time to study, immersing himself in the writings of philosophers like Epictetus or reviewing his own notes from previous days. This was his intellectual and spiritual calisthenics, strengthening the muscles of his mind before they had to bear weight. His workday as emperor was then met with this prepared clarity. He attended to the endless petitions, the military dispatches, the legal judgments, not as a reactive stream of emergencies, but as a series of opportunities to apply the principles he had rehearsed that very morning. The routine created a buffer between his private melancholy and his public duty. He did not have to decide how to feel about each new problem. He simply had to follow the protocol, his own protocol, of addressing it with reason and justice. The structure removed the exhausting mental labor of choice from 1,000 small moments, preserving his willpower for the truly significant decisions. His evenings closed with another ritual, a period of reflection. He would retire and review the day not for its accomplishments, but for its character. He asked himself gentle but firm questions. Where did I act with anger instead of understanding? When did I avoid a duty out of weariness? Did I contribute to the common good? This was not a session of harsh self-criticism, but a quiet audit, a way of aligning his actions back with his professed values. It was a closing of the books on the day's account, allowing him to rest without carrying its unresolved clutter into the night. This relentless cycle, morning preparation, daily application, evening review, formed a container for his life. It meant that on days when the gray fog of melancholy was thickest, he did not have to wonder what to do. The rails were there: get up, read, work, reflect. The routine carried him through the valley of low motivation by sheer momentum. It externalized his discipline, building the stability he needed inside by first building it in the world outside. His rituals were the physical enactment of his philosophy, a daily drama where he played the part of a virtuous leader until, through consistent practice, the role and the man became inseparable. His inner citadel was reinforced by a circle of trusted voices. While Marcus Aurelius is often remembered as the solitary philosopher king, his resilience was not a product of isolation. He built a support system, a network of teachers, family, and colleagues who provided guidance, shared burdens, and offered the human connection essential for any leader, especially one carrying a private sadness. This was a deliberate and practical strategy to lessen the immense cognitive load of ruling an empire alone. His most pivotal relationship in this regard was with his tutor, Junius Rusticus. This was not a childhood teacher, but a respected senator and Stoic philosopher who served as a mentor to the adult emperor. It was Rusticus who handed Marcus a copy of the Discourses by Epictetus, the former slave whose teachings would become the bedrock of his personal philosophy. This single act was transformative. Marcus writes in his Meditations, "From Rusticus I received the impression that my character needed improvement and care." Here was a living example of the philosophy in action, a man who could correct him without arrogance and guide him without flattery. Rusticus provided a tangible model of Stoic integrity, showing Marcus that these were not just abstract ideas, but principles that could be lived in the rough and tumble of Roman politics. This mentorship gave him a sounding board, a trusted advisor with whom he could test his thoughts and sharpen his judgments, ensuring his inner dialogue was challenged and refined by an external, wiser voice. At his side through nearly all of it was his wife, Faustina the Younger. Their relationship is often clouded by salacious rumors from later historians, but the evidence from Marcus' own reign paints a picture of a vital partnership. She accompanied him on many of his military campaigns, a rare act for an empress, which suggests a bond of shared purpose and resilience. Faustina managed complex imperial logistics in his absence, advised on political matters, and bore him many children in an era of high infant loss. While his writings are intensely personal and do not dwell on their relationship, her consistent presence during the most difficult years of his life, the wars, the plague, the long frontier postings, speaks volumes. She represented a pillar of personal stability, a connection to a world beyond duty. To navigate decades of such pressure without a trusted partner would have been a vastly lonelier and more difficult path. Their union, with all its human complexities, provided a private anchor, a reminder of life and continuity amidst the public storms. Then there was the matter of shared rule. For the first 8 years of his reign, Marcus did not rule alone. He insisted on elevating his adopted brother, Lucius Verus, to be his co-emperor, a move that split the immense burden. While Verus' leadership was sometimes criticized, his presence allowed Marcus to delegate the command of the Eastern War against Parthia, focusing his own attention on domestic crises and the looming northern threats. This was a strategic division of cognitive labor. After Verus' passing, the weight fell entirely on Marcus again, leading him to make his most fateful and controversial decision regarding support, the elevation of his son, Commodus. Modern viewers know Commodus as the decadent emperor from popular stories, and history judges this decision harshly. But from Marcus' perspective, it was likely seen as the ultimate act of providing for the empire's future stability and continuing his life's work. He invested heavily in Commodus' education and brought him on campaign, trying to forge him into a philosopher king. This was, in essence, another attempt to build a support system for the empire itself, to create a successor who could share and continue the burden. The tragic outcome does not negate the intention, which was rooted in a practical need for continuity and shared responsibility. The lesson here is profound. Marcus Aurelius, the archetype of self-reliance, did not see asking for help or relying on others as a weakness. It was a tactical necessity, delegating military command to Verus, seeking wisdom from Rusticus, relying on Faustina's steadfastness, and grooming a successor were all methods of cognitive offloading. They freed up space in his own mind, space that would otherwise be consumed by micromanagement, doubt, and sheer exhaustion. This allowed him to preserve his mental energy for the core applications of his philosophy, for the disciplines of perception, action, and will that required his full, undistracted attention. His support system was the scaffolding that allowed the inner citadel to be built and maintained. It reminds us that even the strongest fortresses are not built by one person alone. They require architects, engineers, and steadfast guardians. This practical reliance on others leads us to a final, powerful question. How did this entire system, this blend of personal discipline and communal support, ultimately shape not just the man, but the very legacy he left behind? The most persistent companion in his private thoughts was not an enemy or an advisor, but a simple, universal truth. Marcus Aurelius returned to the idea of life's impermanence with a frequency that might seem startling, writing about it not with dread, but with a calm, almost clinical focus. This was the ancient practice of Memento Mori, remembering you must die, and he wielded it as a precise psychological tool. For a mind prone to the heavy distortions of melancholy, where small failures can feel eternal and personal suffering can seem uniquely significant, this remembrance acted as a corrective lens. By consciously holding the finite nature of his own existence, he performed a radical act of perspective-taking. The angry letter from a senator, the logistical headache of a supply route, even the sharp sting of personal insult, all of it was viewed against the backdrop of a closing horizon. He would ask himself, will this matter in 100 years? The inevitable answer shrunk the immediate crisis down to its proper, manageable size. This was not nihilism, it was a form of mental hygiene. It scrubbed away the false urgency and inflated importance that anxiety loves to attach to daily events. If his time was limited, then squandering it on resentment, petty grievances, or fear of other people's opinions was the real tragedy, not the fleeting discomfort those things caused. The practice systematically lowered the perceived stakes of his daily life, creating emotional room to breathe and act, but it did something more profound for his depression. One of the crushing weights of a low mood is the feeling of being trapped in a permanent state, that the grayness will never lift. By reminding himself constantly that his life, in all its joy and sorrow, was a temporary condition, he subtly challenged that feeling of endlessness. The sadness, too, was transient. This understanding did not erase his melancholy, but it could prevent him from fusing his identity with it. He was not a depressed man, he was a man experiencing depression within a brief, passing lifetime. That slight shift in framing was a source of immense relief and a catalyst for action. If oblivion awaits everyone, from the lowliest soldier to the emperor himself, then the only thing of real consequence is what you do with the time you have. This lit a fire of virtuous urgency under him. His writings echo this repeatedly. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. The clock was always ticking, not to rush him into panic, but to focus him on integrity. Why waste a moment on malice when you could offer kindness? Why delay a just decision when tomorrow is not promised? The shadow of the end made the light of present action all the more vital. His meditation on mortality was, therefore, the ultimate grounding exercise. It pulled him out of the abstract, looping worries of a depressed mind, and planted his feet firmly in the tangible, ethical choices of the current hour. It was a reminder that his legacy was not some distant, polished monument to be worried over, but the sum of his next right action. This constant companionship with life's brevity did not make him callous. It made him intensely present, and in that presence, he found a freedom from the anxieties that had once threatened to paralyze him. Absolute power carries with it a constant, simmering temptation to fury. For Marcus Aurelius, whose word was law and whose displeasure could mean exile or worse, the management of his own anger was not a minor virtue, it was a foundational requirement of just rule. His private journal reads, at times, like an anger management manual written for the most powerful man on earth. He confronts the daily irritants that would grate on any leader, the incompetent official whose bungling delays a supply convoy, the senator who opposes a sensible policy out of sheer vanity, the ally whose loyalty wavers for personal gain. In the heat of the moment, the impulsive response is visceral, a surge of rage that demands immediate punishment, a public shaming, a harsh decree to make an example of them. Marcus trained himself to see that surge for what it was, a dangerous hijacking of his reason. He wrote explicit, patient instructions to himself, a protocol for diffusing his own temper. The first and most critical step was the deliberate pause. When a report of failure or betrayal reached him, he would force himself to stop. Do not react, he would think, until the initial wave of feeling has passed. This created a vital space between the provocation and his response, a buffer zone where his better judgment could assemble. Within that space, he would run a specific mental exercise, considering the perspective of the person who had failed or offended him. He reminds himself constantly that people act according to their own nature and their own understanding. The incompetent official is not evil, he is perhaps ignorant or careless or overwhelmed. The betrayer is acting from fear or short-sighted self-interest. To expect them to be otherwise, he writes, is as foolish as being angry at a fig tree for not bearing grapes. This shift from moral condemnation to neutral observation drained the personal sting from the offense. It transformed the other person from a malicious enemy into a human being operating with flawed logic, a problem to be understood and addressed, not a villain to be crushed. His prescribed response, then, was not the suppression of anger, but its redirection into corrective action. Instead of rage, he aimed for calm, firm correction. The goal was not to vent his feelings, but to improve the situation and educate the individual if possible. A failed administrator might be reassigned with clearer instructions, not publicly disgraced. A disloyal ally might be confronted with the consequences of their actions in a private audience, not humiliated before the court. This discipline served two masterful purposes. For the empire, it maintained stability and morale. A ruler who punishes in rage creates a court of terrified yes-men, where no one dares report bad news and innovation dies. By responding with measured correction, Marcus fostered an environment where problems could be surfaced and solved, not hidden until they became catastrophes. For his own mind, this practice was a lifeline. Unchecked anger, he knew, was a poison he would have to drink himself. It would cloud his judgment for future decisions, disturb his sleep, and feed the very melancholy he worked so hard to manage. Each time he successfully navigated a frustration with patience, he was not just administering the empire, he was administering to his own inner peace. He was proving to himself that his emotions were not his masters. This self-regulation in the face of supreme provocation may be his most quietly impressive achievement, a daily demonstration that true strength lies not in the force of one's wrath, but in the clarity of one's restraint. The pain in his chest was a constant, unwelcome guest. Historical accounts suggest Marcus Aurelius lived with a chronic ailment, perhaps a stomach ulcer or a persistent respiratory condition, a physical burden that shadowed his psychological one. This introduces a crucial dimension of his struggle, the undeniable link between a suffering body and a weary mind. For someone practicing Stoicism, the body presented a fascinating philosophical challenge. The Stoics classified it as an indifferent, meaning it was not inherently good or bad for one's moral character. Health was preferred, illness was dispreferred, but neither condition could make a person virtuous or corrupt. The body was simply the vessel, the borrowed instrument through which one's character, the only true good, was expressed. Marcus did not dismiss his pain, but he refused to let it define him. He writes of enduring sharp pains without surrendering to them, of treating his body with a detached, almost clinical care, not out of vanity or fear, but because it was the tool he needed to do his work. He would attend to its needs with the same practical diligence he applied to maintaining a legion's equipment, ensuring it was fed, rested, and functional enough to serve its purpose. When chest pain gripped him during a council meeting, he did not see it as a personal tragedy or a valid reason to abandon his duty. He categorized it, along with the weather or an enemy's movement, as an external event, something in folder 2. His response, his endurance, his decision to continue listening and contributing, that was in folder 1, entirely within his power. This mindset prevented his identity from collapsing into that of a sick man. He was not a patient who happened to be emperor, he was an emperor who happened to be managing a physical condition. The pain was a fact like the marble of a statue, and his virtue was the skill with which he carved his actions around it. There is a profound lesson here about resilience. He did not transcend physical suffering through sheer will. He navigated it by refusing to grant it a vote in his decisions. By treating the body as an indifferent instrument, he protected his core self, his capacity for reason and justice, from being held hostage by its frailties. The chest pain could tighten his breath, but it could not dictate his speech. The fatigue could weigh on his limbs, but it could not absolve him of his responsibilities. He greeted his ailments with a kind of graceful pragmatism, acknowledging their presence while steadily withdrawing the attention and emotional energy that would magnify their power. In doing so, he demonstrated that our deepest strength is not found in a body free from pain, but in a mind that remains clear and purposeful even while in pain's company. His private writings reveal a man constantly fighting a powerful urge to turn away from the world he led. Amidst the grand challenges of war and plague, Marcus Aurelius confesses to a more intimate, corrosive struggle, a deep disgust with the pettiness and vanity he witnessed daily in the corridors of power. He writes of the endless spectacle of ambition, the flattery of courtiers, the greed of officials, the sheer repetitive folly of human behavior. In one raw passage, he lays it bare, saying, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil." This is not the detached observation of a philosopher, but the weary sigh of a leader who has had his fill. The temptation was not just frustration, but a profound cynicism, a belief that the people were not worth the immense sacrifice he was making for them. Why bother ruling for the ungrateful? Why strive to build a just society for the corrupt? The logical, despairing conclusion was to withdraw, to retreat into his own mind and let the empire rot. This was the siren call of his melancholy, to see humanity at its worst and decide the entire project was meaningless. He felt the pull intensely, the desire to view people as annoying obstacles rather than as a community he was bound to serve. For a mind already inclined toward sadness, cynicism offered a seductive, simplifying story. It transformed complex duty into a reason for disdain, yet he recognized this impulse as one of his greatest dangers. A cynical emperor is a tyrant in the making, or an absentee ruler. So, in his journal, he began a deliberate, patient argument against his own disgust. He deployed a core Stoic principle, the concept of shared rationality. He reminded himself that every person, no matter how flawed, possessed a spark of the same universal reason, the same capacity for good that he sought to cultivate in himself. Their corruption was not their nature, but a distortion of it, a kind of sickness. He writes, "It is the act of a tyrant to hate them, for they too are compelled by their own false impressions." Just as a doctor does not get angry at a patient for having a fever, a leader should not despise people for their moral sickness. His duty was not to condemn them for their flaws, but to help guide them toward their better nature, however imperfectly. He framed his leadership not as a burden borne for the worthy, but as a service rendered precisely because people were lost. He argued himself back into connection by focusing on the common good, the swarm. A bee does not abandon the hive because some bees are lazy. It continues to make honey for the whole. He forced himself to look past the irritating surface behavior to the shared human core beneath, to the capacity for reason, love, and community that exists in everyone, even when it is buried. This mental practice was a daily recommitment to his role. It meant leading not from a place of affection, which could be worn away by disappointment, but from a place of principled obligation. He served because it was right, because his station demanded it, and because withdrawing would be a betrayal of the very rationality he claimed to cherish. By arguing himself out of cynicism, he protected his own humanity from the hardening effects of absolute power. He chose to see the pettiness around him not as a reason to quit, but as the very evidence of why his work was necessary. Centuries before modern psychology gave it a name, Marcus Aurelius was practicing a form of cognitive therapy on himself. The exercises in his private journal bear a remarkable resemblance to the core techniques of what we now call cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. At its heart, CBT is based on a simple but powerful idea. Our emotions and behaviors are not caused directly by events, but by our interpretations of those events. It teaches individuals to identify their automatic negative thoughts, challenge the distortions within them, and replace those thoughts with more balanced, rational beliefs. Read the Meditations with this in mind, and it becomes clear Marcus was his own therapist, using the pages as a treatment manual for his depressive mind. He begins with what a CBT practitioner would call thought catching. a messenger brings bad news from the front, and his mind immediately leaps to a catastrophic conclusion. Marcus does not let that conclusion stand as truth. He catches it, isolates it, and writes it down. This act of externalizing the thought, of taking it from the swirling chaos of his mind and placing it on the page, is the first critical step. It creates distance. The thought is no longer him. It is now an object he can observe and analyze. He then moves to the next stage, challenging cognitive distortions. He examines the thought for what he called false impressions. Is this event truly a disaster, or am I catastrophizing? Is this person's action a personal betrayal, or am I mind reading their intentions? He systematically questions the evidence for his initial, despairing interpretation. He writes, "Do not be carried away by the vividness of the impression, but say, 'Impression, wait for me a little. Let me see what you are and what you represent. Let me test you.'" This is the essence of cognitive restructuring, pausing the emotional cascade to interrogate the validity of the thought itself. Finally, he engages in belief replacement. Once he has identified the distortion, he consciously cultivates a more accurate, constructive belief to take its place. The thought, "This setback proves I am a failure as a commander," might be replaced with, "A setback is a neutral event that provides new information for my strategy. My worth is in my reasoned response, not in the uncontrollable outcome." He did not try to argue himself into feeling happy. He argued himself into thinking clearly. His goal was not forced positivity, but factual accuracy. By correcting his perceptions, the emotional response would naturally follow, becoming less intense and more manageable. This is precisely the mechanism of CBT. We see him apply this to his low moods about human nature. The automatic thought, "People are wretched and not worth serving," is challenged with the rational counter. "People act from ignorance, not malice, and my role is to guide, not to despise." His entire journal is a ledger of these cognitive transactions, a relentless effort to dispute the depressive narratives his mind generated and to invest in a more truthful, actionable story. In this light, Meditations is far more than a philosophical text. It is a workbook. Each entry is a session where Marcus practices spotting his cognitive distortions, like overgeneralizing from a single event or emotional reasoning, and then diligently writes a more proportionate, useful narrative. He was building mental muscle memory for resilience. He understood that his mind, left to its own devices, would tell him stories that led to despair. So he became the editor of those stories, crossing out the hyperbole and rewriting the sentences with a steadier hand. This was not a one-time cure, but a daily maintenance program, a cognitive hygiene routine as vital to his leadership as any military drill was to his legions. It proves a profound point. The tools for managing a troubled mind are not new, they are ancient and human. They reside not in avoiding difficult thoughts, but in learning the skilled, patient art of answering them back. This internal struggle did not paralyze his rule, it shaped its very character. We can see the fingerprints of his disciplined mind on the major decisions of his reign, decisions that stand in stark contrast to the volatile, ego-driven actions of more impulsive emperors who came before and after. Where a ruler like Nero might have responded to crisis with theatrical cruelty or grandiose distraction, Marcus responded with meticulous, often self-sacrificing diligence. His approach to law is a prime example. He did not see legal power as a tool for personal vengeance or arbitrary display. Instead, he treated it as the sacred machinery of social harmony, something to be operated with extreme care. He famously spent long hours hearing cases personally, often extending his sessions late into the evening. His rulings were noted for their emphasis on fairness over technicality and a deep consideration for the weaker party. This was not the behavior of a man seeking glory, but of one performing a solemn duty. His patience here was a direct product of his philosophy, the understanding that justice was a daily practice, a series of small, correct actions that maintained the whole. He could afford to be patient in court because his mind was trained to value the long-term health of the system over the short-term satisfaction of a swift, harsh verdict. This same disciplined perspective defined his financial response to the Antonine Plague. Faced with a depleted treasury from war and a population in desperate need, a more impulsive leader might have levied crushing new taxes on the provinces, a move that would have bred resentment and rebellion. Marcus chose the opposite path. He sold off imperial treasures, including gold statues, fine furniture, and even his own wife's jewelry, at a public auction to raise emergency funds. He did this not as a publicity stunt, but as a practical application of the view from above. What were gilded ornaments compared to the lives of his citizens? This act of personal sacrifice channeled resources directly into relief efforts, funding doctors, supporting orphans, and providing funeral expenses for the poor. It was leadership by example, rooted in the Stoic principle that the ruler's wealth belonged to the people's welfare. His military strategy further reflects this mindset. The campaigns along the Danube were not swift, glorious conquests aimed at immortalizing his name. They were a grueling, 16-year-long exercise in containment and pacification. He fought not for empire but for security, methodically pushing tribes back, fortifying borders, and negotiating settlements when possible. He was persistent, yes, but not recklessly aggressive. He accepted the slow, hard work of frontier defense because his goal was a stable peace, not a dazzling victory. This long-term perspective, this willingness to endure a marathon of hardship, was the direct output of a mind that had made peace with struggle. He did not need a quick win to feel validated. His sense of purpose was built on the integrity of the ongoing effort itself. In every one of these choices, we see a leader whose first instinct was not to dominate, but to steward, to repair, and to endure. His internal battle with melancholy produced not weakness, but a profound kind of strength, one that was cautious, compassionate, and unshakably focused on the common good. Perhaps the most debated line he ever wrote was never in his journal, but in the official record of succession. When Marcus Aurelius named his son Commodus as his heir, he made a decision that history has judged with almost uniform harshness. This act stands in stark contrast to the image of the wise philosopher king, and it forces us to confront a complex, tragic tension at the heart of his life. On one hand stood his stoic duty to the Roman state, which demanded he appoint the most capable leader for the common good. On the other stood his profound Roman duty as a father, the cultural and personal obligation to secure his family's legacy and provide for his own blood. His writings offer glimpses into this inner conflict. He speaks of family with a deep, protective tenderness, noting the natural affection one feels for one's children. He saw the family as a microcosm of the human community, the first school where one learns loyalty and care. To disinherit his only surviving son, especially in an empire that was beginning to view the throne as a hereditary right, would have been a shocking and destabilizing act of political idealism. It is likely he saw the choice not as a simple either-or, but as a both-and. He could fulfill his paternal duty and his duty to the state simultaneously if he could shape Commodus into a worthy leader. This was his hope, and it became his project. From a young age, he surrounded Commodus with the finest tutors, the very men who had guided his own thinking, including the Stoic philosopher Junius Rusticus. He took his son on the grueling Danube campaigns, not to a life of palace luxury, but to the mud and discipline of the frontier, hoping to instill in him the same virtues of endurance and responsibility. In his mind, he was not abandoning the needs of the swarm for the sake of the single bee. He was trying to train that bee to serve the hive. He believed, perhaps with the desperate optimism of a father, that his own example and the right instruction could cultivate reason within his son. The tragic flaw in this plan was a Stoic principle he himself wrote about constantly, but could not apply to his own child, the understanding that character is ultimately not imposed from without, but chosen from within. You can provide the finest teachers and the noblest example, but you cannot force another person to adopt wisdom. The outcome, as history records, was a disaster. Commodus rejected philosophy for spectacle, duty for personal indulgence, and stability for capricious rule. This is why the decision feels like such a profound failure. Yet, to view it solely as a philosophical hypocrisy is to miss the human complexity of the man. Marcus Aurelius was not a perfect sage. He was a father trying to reconcile two irreconcilable loyalties in a system that offered no clean solution. In the end, his deepest personal hope collided with the unforgiving reality of another's free will. The Commodus problem reminds us that even the most disciplined mind must sometimes make choices in the gray area where principle meets love, and where the best-laid plans of a parent can be undone by the unpredictable character of a child. So did his philosophy cure the melancholy? The honest answer, echoing through his own words, is likely no. The dark weather of his mind seems to have been a persistent climate, not a passing storm. Stoicism was never presented as a cure for such feelings, and Marcus never claims one. Instead, it offered him something far more practical and, in many ways, more powerful, a functional operating system for a life he could not abandon. The goal was not to eliminate the sadness, but to prevent it from holding the steering wheel. Ancient philosophers distinguished between two states, eudaimonia, which is often translated as happiness or flourishing, and ataraxia, a state of tranquility or undisturbed peace. Marcus did not chase a fleeting feeling of happiness, which would always be at the mercy of external events and internal chemistry. He pursued ataraxia, an inner calm born from accepting reality as it is, and virtue, the excellence of one's character. And by that measure, the evidence of his life suggests a profound success. His inner weather remained variable, often overcast, but his actions were remarkably consistent, fair, and resilient. He built a seawall between his private sorrow and his public duty, and that wall held against decades of crashing waves. The philosophy did not stop the rain from falling inside him, but it taught him how to keep walking, how to build shelters for others, and how to find purpose in the very act of moving forward through the downpour. His legacy is not one of a man who conquered his depression, but of a man who refused to let it conquer his capacity for good. The statues and history books often present a marble figure of perfect calm. This is the modern myth of Marcus Aurelius, the unshakable philosopher king radiating serene wisdom from a golden throne. It is an inspiring image, but it is also a subtle trap. It sets a standard of perfect emotional control that feels impossible for anyone with an ordinary, turbulent inner life. The real man, however, is far more compelling and far more useful. Open his private journal and the serene mask shatters. What you hear is not the confident monologue of a sage, but the raw, repetitive dialogue of a man in a daily argument with his own mind. He is not proclaiming truths from a mountaintop. He is whispering reminders to himself in a military tent, coaching himself through another difficult dawn. He wrestles with the impulse to stay in bed, to snap at an incompetent subordinate, to give in to despair about human pettiness. He does not write, "I have conquered anger." He writes, "When you wake up, tell yourself the people you meet will be arrogant and dishonest." This is not a statement of fact, it is a preparatory drill, a mental inoculation against the frustration he knows is coming. He is not describing a state of achieved perfection, he is documenting the messy, ongoing practice of trying. This is what makes his example so powerfully accessible. His greatness lies not in never stumbling, but in the relentless discipline of getting back up and returning to his principles. He forgets, he feels the pull of cynicism, he wakes up tired and sad, and then he reaches for his notebook and begins the argument all over again. His meditations are essentially a logbook of course corrections. He is constantly recentering, like a sailor in a rough sea who keeps glancing back at the compass, not because he is lost, but because the wind and waves are always trying to push him off track. This is the real practice, the one that matters for any of us. It is not about achieving a permanent state of enlightened calm. It is about building the habit of return. When you lose your temper, the work is not to pretend it never happened, but to acknowledge it, understand its trigger, and reaffirm your commitment to patience. When a wave of melancholy makes everything seem pointless, the work is not to suddenly feel joyful, but to mechanically engage in the next right action, however small, as your anchor to the world. Marcus shows us that resilience is a verb, not a noun. It is the repeated action of coming back to your chosen path, dusting off the discouragement, and taking the next step. His legacy is not a flawless statue for us to admire from a distance. It is a worn, personal notebook filled with crossed-out thoughts and rewritten sentences, offering us the profound permission to be a work in progress and the simple, brutal strategy for continuing the work. His journal speaks across centuries because it addresses a quiet, universal human experience. We do not need to rule an empire to understand the weight of showing up when we feel like hiding, of making decisions under a cloud of private sorrow. In our own lives, the crises may be different, but the internal landscape can feel strikingly familiar. The anxiety before a major presentation, the heavy responsibility of caring for a family, the persistent low hum of stress in a demanding job, these are the modern provinces we are tasked to govern. Marcus Aurelius resonates not because he was uniquely powerful, but because he was profoundly human, mapping a path through territory we all recognize. His struggle validates a crucial truth, that feeling broken inside does not disqualify you from strength. In fact, his entire life argues that true strength is forged in the acknowledgement and management of that very brokenness, not in its denial. We often fall into a cultural trap, believing that leaders or capable people in general are those who have somehow transcended doubt and fear. We imagine composure must mean an empty mind free from turmoil. Marcus shatters that illusion. He shows us that leadership in any form is not the absence of weakness. It is the daily practice of building a structure around it, of creating protocols for your mind so that your duties get done regardless of the weather inside. A parent getting children ready for school while grappling with their own sadness is exercising the same discipline of action he used on the Danube. An employee meeting a deadline despite a paralyzing wave of anxiety is applying his dichotomy of control, focusing on the next task rather than the storm of fear. His relevance is not historical, it is operational. He provides a clear, tested manual for functioning under internal pressure. The tools he honed are not locked away in ancient texts for scholars alone. They are remarkably accessible, requiring no special title or resources, only a commitment to a different kind of inner dialogue. When you feel overwhelmed by a situation at work, you can perform his mental sort. What here is truly within my power, my preparation, my communication, my next action? What is outside of it, my manager's mood, the final outcome, a colleague's opinion? This simple act creates immediate relief and clarity, carving a manageable path through a thicket of worry. When you are burdened by a sense of weariness or disillusionment, you can borrow his evening review. Not a harsh critique, but a gentle audit. Where did I act with integrity today? Where did I let frustration steer me? This practice builds self-awareness without self-condemnation, turning each day into a stepping stone rather than a sentence. His greatest gift may be the permission to see your own mind as a workshop, not a verdict. He did not wake up one day cured of his melancholy and ready to rule. He woke up each day with it and then got to work on the things he could influence. This is the hopeful, practical core of his legacy. You do not need to wait to feel better to live well. You can begin the work of building resilience now with the materials you currently have, including your doubts and your fatigue. The goal is not to become a marble statue of perfect calm, but to become a skilled navigator of your own inner weather. Your capacity for meaningful action is not on hold until your internal struggles are resolved. It is available right now, in the next choice you make, in the next small duty you attend to with a bit more patience or a bit more clarity. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who fought a silent war within, leaves us with a powerful and deeply comforting idea. Our worth is not measured by the absence of shadows, but by the quality of the light we choose to cultivate in their presence. He ruled for 19 years, a reign that began with war and ended with him dying in a military camp, still fighting to secure the frontier. In that span, Marcus Aurelius faced a cascade of disasters that would have shattered a less prepared empire, and he left it not diminished but intact. The northern borders were secured, the legal system was more just, and the treasury, though drained, was managed without crushing the people. This was his public legacy, a testament to stability forged in relentless crisis. But his private legacy, the one that echoes far louder through time, was left in the pages of a simple notebook. That collection of personal reminders, what we call meditations, survived purely by chance. It was never meant for publication. It was found among his personal effects after his passing, a raw and unpolished record of a mind in dialogue with itself. This accidental survival is our great fortune. It offers no grand speeches or polished history, only the immediate, sometimes desperate, notes of a man using philosophy as an emergency protocol. We see him in real time applying Stoic principles not as abstract theory but as cognitive first aid. When despair whispers to give up, he writes a counter-argument. When anger flares, he drafts a memo on patience. The journal is the living proof of his method, the workshop where he forged the tools he used to govern both an empire and his own inner world. It is a tangible artifact of resilience, showing us that the most powerful mental techniques are often just disciplined conversations we learn to have with ourselves. The true measure of his life is found in that paradox. Marcus Aurelius did not rule an empire in spite of his deep melancholy. He ruled effectively because he built a system to integrate that very struggle into a life of service. His greatness was not a state of being, but a relentless commitment to a process. It was the daily, sometimes hourly, discipline of cleaning his perception of catastrophic thinking, of channeling his energy into right action regardless of his inner weather, and of accepting all outcomes with a will anchored only to his own integrity. He turned his private pain into the raw material for public good, proving that our deepest wounds do not have to be destinations. They can become compasses, pointing us toward what truly needs our care. His example offers no fantasy of an escape from human suffering. Instead, it provides something far more durable, a dignified and resilient way to carry that suffering while still contributing to the world. You need not wait to feel whole to begin living with purpose. The Stoic practices he refined in those frontier tents are not relics. They are a remarkably practical toolkit for anyone facing the quiet battles of modern life, for managing stress, for navigating uncertainty, for finding steadiness when the ground feels unstable. If his journey resonates with you, the door to that workshop remains open. It begins with a single, personal question, the same one he asked himself each morning, and perhaps with the very book he never meant for you to read.